requirement for us to reach our level 5 is we have to have all employees and all volunteers trained in what they call soul injury. So we really appreciate you guys being here. The training that they sent us is an hour and 45-minute video, about 45 minutes of which is them talking about their technical issues. So we really thought we could bring that down a little bit for you guys. And so we've done a fairly decent job of that. Hope that helps you all, not to be, because you will be here about 45 minutes with question and answer. So we hope that helps you what the time in the field is like. The first sheet I want to mention is just a single sheet. This is something that they use to help identify if someone has a soul injury. We're just giving it to you. You can keep it. You can do it if you or feel so inclined that you want to answer the questions and see if you feel like you might have a soul injury. Other people are keeping it and going, oh, I know somebody who might have a soul injury. This might be good for them. I've had a couple people in the company who have done it and then decided they need to talk. And if that is you, please come see me. That is part of my job, is to take care of staff and volunteers. And I would be happy to sit down and talk with you if you do this and go, wow, I have soul injury. Okay? With that said, we will get started. I think most everybody knows me, but for those of you who don't, I'm Mary Beth. I am the bereavement coordinator here and a member of the We Honor Vets Committee. We are working for our level 5, and they have quite a bit for us to do, including this, so really appreciate you guys taking the time. One of the reasons that we are so involved with We Honor Vets is that 1 in 4 dying people in America is a veteran. That's a huge number, 1 in 4. And so we have veterans all the time on our services, so we want to make sure we take care of them very well. They ask us to educate on soul injury. And what soul injury is, and you guys will have to excuse me, I'm very nervous because of the camera. I'm not a camera person, but so what is soul injury? Soul injury is an overlooked, unassessed wound that separates one from their real self, that causes a person to feel personally defective, inadequate, or unworthy. Now on your handouts, you'll see that there's 2 more slides with definitions. I'm not going to go over those because for me, as I watched the video, the definition of soul injury came through when they talked about a young soldier in the Vietnam era. And this soldier was being trained as a sharpshooter, a marksman, and he was doing great, like hitting the bullseye every time when he had those round targets. And then they changed their target to the human form target, and he went, oh my gosh, I know what I'm being trained for. And he wasn't okay with it. So he took his hands and he stuck them into boiling water, and he held them there to make sure that he could not shoot a gun again. Well, the Army took him and fixed his hands, but he could not shoot a gun again. So they made him a medic, and he served as a medic during that time. And so one day in the operating room as a medic during wartime, operating rooms were crazy and busy and bloody, and they were working on a young soldier, a very young man, and lots of other things going on around, and they worked on this guy, and they worked on this guy, and the other patients were taken care of and out of the room, and they were still working on this guy. And finally the doctor took his gloves off and put him on the patient and said, clean up the mess. They couldn't save him. And everybody else walked out except this young guy who had done this to his hands. And he said he looked up to the heavens and just screamed, and as he screamed, he felt his soul leaving his body. He never again felt like he knew who he was as a person. He talks about that he, in his case, spent a lot of time trying to do good, trying to prove to himself and others that he was a good person. So he, did missionary work and all that kind of stuff. But he never connected with who he felt he was again. So for me, that was the definition of a soul injury. The concept of soul injury is actually brought to us by nurses who worked in VA hospice and dealt with over 10,000 dying veterans. They saw firsthand the fact that these veterans had memories and stuff surfacing that were unbidden from combat days. And the important word there is unbidden. What happens when someone is sick or hurting? I know some of you are VNA people and some of you are hospice people, but think about yourself. If you're here and you've still got 10 things going on out in the world, your car needs fixed, you gotta go to the grocery store, that kind of stuff, but you're fairly healthy and you're sitting here and you can say, oh, right now they need me to pay attention to this and learn this, so you can make yourself attend to what I'm saying. But if you got the flu even, or you hurt your leg and it's really achy, it is really hard for you to attend here. Your body may be here, but slowly but surely the other things you've got to get done are bubbling to the top of your head. Oh, my car's not starting, how am I gonna? Because negatives come to the top when we are in pain. We worry more when we are not feeling well. That's kind of human nature. So a lot of people talk about our dying patients doing life reviews, and sometimes that's what they're doing, but sometimes when it's very negative, they're actually telling us that it's not a choice to do a life review, it's just coming to the top. And that's what that these nurses felt like they were seeing with the veterans, was that this was not something they were looking for, it was just happening. And so it's unmourned, unforgiven. It has in their lifetime, it's stored up in their bodies, in their minds, in their spirits. It's often sabotaged their lives. And it's generated both physical and emotional symptoms throughout their lifetime. And we're very likely, when they're sick or dying, to see these symptoms really express themselves. So who is at risk for developing soul injuries? Vietnam veterans. Now, every once in a while, as a member of this committee, someone will say to me, why do people, the powers that be, want you guys to focus so much on Vietnam vets when we have so many vets alive? And there are actually some reasons for that. And the reasons for that are, first of all, even though we have older vets, the Korean War vets, and we even have some World War II vets around, our Vietnam vets are dying at a pretty high rate. And a lot of that has to do with the things that they experienced in Vietnam. They're actually dying a little bit younger. So that's part of the issue. But Vietnam was our longest war ever. A lot of people don't know that, but it was our longest war. Second of all, it was the very first war that was seen on the television. Every other war was newspaper and that kind of stuff, but this was the first war that came into our homes. That was a big deal. And the other thing is, it is the only war that America lost. We are not victors in Vietnam. And so our soldiers came home not to victory and not welcomed in a lot of cases. So it is huge that we take care of our Vietnam vets. But all vets, and whether they actually saw combat or not, all vets are susceptible to soul injuries. The other thing is, it is not just veterans. Any person who has had a major trauma, or what we might not even consider a major trauma, they consider it a trauma in their life, is susceptible to a soul injury. Their list included so many. Certainly, I've worked with molestation and rape victims, and when I heard this, I identified them very quickly as people who had soul injuries, or a lot of them. But loss of personal health, loss of a loved one, minorities, marginalized people, stoic culture, which, by the way, nurses, people who work hospice, people who work DNA, including our volunteers, we have to put on some stoicism ourselves, and that simply means when we walk into, a person dying or terribly sick and has a terrible wound, we kind of take a deep breath and deal with that problem rather than falling to pieces. That's kind of what stoicism is, and we want our vets, and we need that in our jobs, and just having to do that can create a soul injury. Personal caregivers, people who are vulnerable to burnout, and the list simply goes on. As caregivers, it is important for us to know, especially at the end of life, that soul injuries play an important role for patients. These injuries come from traumas and situations that leave the person feeling helpless, out of control, and alone. Those last three things are very important to remember. They make the person feel helpless, out of control, and alone. Those really truly come into play, especially when someone's hurting or at the end of life. These injuries can be compounded by what they call secondary wounds. And with the permission from Ron Horndash, I think most of you probably had the privilege of meeting Ron. He is one of our veteran volunteers. I tell you the story of Ron's secondary wound. And a secondary wound basically is after the fact of whatever has happened to you, the trauma, then somebody, usually somebody who should care for you, hurt you again. In Ron's case, he was a Vietnam War vet. He came back, it took him several years, but he kind of got back on his feet, and he decided it was time to go to school. So he was in his class at ISU, I believe it's ISU, maybe I should quote that, but he was in his college level class, and he's sitting there, the class hasn't started, but the classroom's filling up, lots of people coming in, people sitting, and the professor walks down and walks up to Ron and says, "So how many babies did you kill?"
Oh gosh. Oh my goodness.
My first husband was a Vietnam vet. When he got off the plane, he was met with rotten tomatoes and eggs and lots of terrible things said to him. That is our nation giving a secondary wound to our vets. Rape victims often talk about at the hospital or the police or family members giving them secondary wounding. I worked with molestation victims for years. I worked with people who, I'm sitting there, especially when I was early on, I'd be going, they're going to come in and tell me about the rape or the molestation. I'd be, kind of sitting myself. And they come in and talk about, well, I told my mom, but all she said was, what do you want me to do about it? Or I told the school and they didn't even fire the teacher. Or I told the priest, and look at what the Catholic Church has done. Because the secondary wound of them not taking care of them ran deeper for these people. It ran very deep. And that is important for us to know, because what the nurses found was it affects our care, or how we can care for people with soul injuries. So this does influence how the patient responds to care. All this does. They can even react differently to medications. 40% of people, 40% of, this isn't usually my part, 40% of people experience terminal agitation at the end of life. Usually they respond to medication. If they're experiencing terminal agitation, they just can't get comfortable. They give them some medication that calms them down. However, people with soul injury, they are finding pain medications actually increase their symptoms. And that goes back to those three things. They feel helpless, out of control, and alone. How many of you have ever had pain medication? I hate being on pain medication because I can't tell you what I want. I can't get to the bathroom by myself. I can't get my own pop because my husband doesn't make my pop right. He doesn't put enough ice in it. I am out of control. It doesn't work for me. And that's what they're feeling. That medication just increases that feeling of being out of control and alone. And so the medication actually has an opposite effect. Ashley, our on-call nurse, when she took this training run after she had met with a woman, and she said this training hit home so, like, bam, it just hit home, because every time they would touch this woman, she would just go ballistic. But everything else was fine if they just talked to her, you know, all those things. But medication and touching her just sent this woman off. She started talking to the family, and this woman was raped by her father when she was young, and beaten and held in a closet and that kind of stuff. And so any contact with them and the medications made her feel helpless, controlled, out of, you know, and alone. And so Ashley just kind of backed off and educated the family. Don't do those things. Talk to her and listen to her, and don't do those things. But she was like, it was like textbook. This one was just textbook soul injury. So dying, being ill, feeling anxious. You know, I work in the ER and I see people over there. They may leave the ER in a couple hours and be told they're fine, but they don't know they're fine because they're in pain or whatever. So they're very anxious about what's going on with them. So feelings of fear, feeling alone, self-loathing, those things are really happening for them. This is also the point where they are not trusting us. We're a system. They're not trusting nurses, they're not trusting doctors, they're not trusting us. So when these feelings start to arise in them, they start to play out what they're, you know, so the VA nurses talked a lot about, they would walk into a room and there would be a soldier crouched in a corner like he was, you know, holding a gun ready to, you know, protect himself, or would grab them like they had a knife around, you know, because not that they had those things, but they were playing out really bad memories and protecting themselves in those situations. What Ashley saw was a young girl trying to protect herself, so she was acting out. So that happens quite a bit, that we see more acting out from patients who have soul injuries. Oftentimes, especially if the event happened in childhood, you'll see them act actually like children. And so that's just important to note. When you see these kind of behaviors in your mind, you know, you don't want to say, hey, you might have a soul injury, but you do want to go, this person might be a person with a soul injury, and therefore how I'm approaching this, I might want to adjust. Also, patients with soul injuries, like many of us, have used various numbing agents to help them throughout their life. This might include smoking, denial that anything ever has happened to them, drug use, overeating, working, you know, those kind of things. Well, especially on hospice, and probably a lot on VNA as well, you know, I've been accused of being a workaholic. I can't do that when I'm on hospice. I'm in a bed. So my numbing agents are also being taken away at the end of life. And that's important to recognize, because if we recognize, hey, you know, it's not just that you're in bed and you're suffering, and, you know, we kind of minimize that and don't recognize that is a removal of their numbing agents. You know, a lot of people understand when we have a patient that wants a drink. And by the way, hospice will occasionally let somebody have a drink, depends on the medications they're on. It's not like we take it away completely, but what has helped them cope is no longer available to them. So part of our job is to start recognizing that their natural coping skills, whether you call it a numbing agent or whether you call it a coping skill, are not available to them. They're not potentially available to them, because a workaholic who is very ill and or dying can't get up and work. Patients with soul injuries often use stoicism effectively in their their life. So that's great. You know, part of how our first responders, I don't want a police officer, you know, if somebody's breaking in my house, I don't want a police officer coming in and not being stoic and being able to address the situation, going, oh my gosh, I'm scared, I can't, I want them to, you know, be able to address that. I want them to be stoic. Unfortunately, stoicism doesn't really work at the end of life. Sometimes it doesn't even work when we're sick, because they're going to, especially in hospice, they are going to die. Especially when they're very, very sick, even though they may be recovering, stoicism actually holds in some of the emotions that, if they let them out, might help them to heal. So stoicism at this point in time doesn't always work. And so if we have a military person, a first responder, a hospice or B&A nurse who's done a great job all their life, we might want to look at, are they still trying to use that stoicism? How we respond really does help, and we need to start looking at the whole person rather than just the fact that they're dying or just, you know, but really truly looking at the whole person helps them to heal better for B&A, helps them to have a better death at their hospice. Trust is very minimal. Again, going back, especially if you have a soul injury with a secondary wound, trust is minimal. You're that system that did that secondary wound, that country that was so mean to him, or that mom that didn't respond to them. So why would they trust that hospice? So recognizing right away that trust is minimal for people with soul injuries, and really working to earn trust quickly. And one of the best ways to do this is listen non-judgmentally. And listening non-judgmentally means a couple things. First of all, basically listening. Closing your mouth and opening your ears is one of the best things you can do. Also, really watching what you say. If they say, you don't know how many people I killed, they'll go, oh no, that's terrible. And they may think it's terrible. But from their point of view, they may hear a judgment from you. They may think, oh, they're judging that I was terrible. Look at the person. The easiest way to do this is to just simply look at the person. If they're crying and they're very upset as they're telling you this, then say, I can tell by how you're saying this that really hurt you. That's a different statement than, oh, this is terrible. Because you might be feeling, oh, how terrible for you, but they might hear something else. Or if you say, oh, how terrible for you, they might be thinking, hey, I was the one that walked away from the war. That's not terrible for me. My country was protected, and that was a great thing. So just very carefully and watch your person and speak in the here and now about how your person is responding. That will help to take the judgment away, or what they hear as judgment away, and help calm them. One of the interesting things was that was about the only hint that they gave, other than this next thing, the anchoring heart. They really didn't talk a lot about how to help people with soul injuries, so I did a little bit of research. But I do want to do the anchoring heart with you. And the anchoring heart, and I'm doing a very brief version of it, but I do want you to do it with me. You put your hand across your heart and you encourage your patient to do it, or if they can't, you do it with them. If they can close their eyes, encourage them to close their eyes. And then you very gently talk and say, your heart is beating. You're okay. You're breathing. You can feel yourself breathing. You're okay. You've held this pain for a long time, but I'm here to hold it with you. And you're okay. And just keep very calmly saying things like that. Whatever is appropriate for them. And then if you see them working up, that will help to bring them down. And feeling your own heartbeat. How many of you, when you hear bad news, go,
I do. When I heard anchoring heart, now there is a video that does a much better, longer job of showing you how to do anchoring heart, and you have it at the end of your, you have the information on how to see it at the end of your thing, if you would like to see it in more depth, but you can do that. But for me, I did a little bit more research, and these are two things that are huge, and I think they're huge in everything, and it's ask permission and give permission. And first of all, ask permission, and I use myself as an example. I literally have no veins. My veins are the size of about a 10-year-old. They really are. And when I'm in the hospital and the vampires come in and tell me, I'm going to take your blood, I go, because I've never had them do it within, it takes at least 3 sticks, and I've had them do it at least as many as 22 times. I know it's going to hurt. I know they're going to bruise me. I know it's, but when they say I'm going to, I go like this. Now, I'm an intelligent person. That doesn't help them. I know this. It's stupid. It's going to be the same regardless. But when a vampire comes into my room, I don't know the real name for those people, but they're very nice people actually. When they come into my room and say, the doctor ordered blood draw, can I give it a try? Can I try to get your blood? I don't do that. I'm okay. I still know, with all my heart, it's going to take at least 3 sticks. It's still going to hurt. I'm still going to be bruised. But what they did was they left me in control. And there is a difference. There is a difference when you're in control, especially when you're sick and in a hospital room, and it's scary. I was working the ER, and one night we had this woman just going ballistic when I came in, and the nurses stopped me and they were like, Mary Beth, we don't know what her problem is, because for the last 2 hours she was fine. And now she's crazy. And I said, for the last 2 hours, were you still doing tests and stuff? I said, yeah. And I said, now you're not doing anything, right? Waiting on tests or whatever? And they said, yeah. I said, she's a trauma victim. For 2 hours you were taking care of her. Now she's just trapped in a room. That's all she is she's trapped. She and I talked. That's exactly what she was. She was trapped in a room. Because she was out of control. And during the time people were taking care of her, she had some control, she had some care. After that, when it was just a waiting game, she had time to think and get crazy. So asking her permission, hey, what would you like to do while you have to wait? She and I walked around the hospital, the ER twice, and then she was okay with sitting in her room. She had permission to be in charge. And then give permission, and this is where the stoicism really comes into play. When you have somebody who's spent their life paying their bills, it's been their job, their career, they've protected their country, they've protected their family, they've protected their neighborhood by being stoic, being that police officer, that first responder, that, whatever, nurse, and now they are facing something where stoicism is not working for them, saying to them, preferably when there's not a lot of people around, you've had to be pretty tough all your life, but I'm here and it's just me and you, and if you'd like to say something, express something, if you need to have a good cry with me, I'm okay to do that with you. Giving them permission to let them guard, not an expectation, hey, come on, cry, but just a permission to let that down and express some emotion that they would not normally be able or willing to do is sometimes a really good thing for people. Say, hey, it's okay to cry. Really gives people permission to let it out. And that is our presentation on soul nurture. Does anybody have any questions, comments? Carlos is breathing. Sorry. No questions? All right. For those of you who know you need to sit for the 15, if you haven't watched the 15 things you need to know about vets, then I will grab Julie for you.